Hello again, Salem. This is William Legault from Salem Digest here at the Salem Access Television Studios on Derby Street, and we're bringing you yet another candidate for elective office here in Salem. And today we're fortunate enough to have with us in the opposite seat David Freni, who's running for the Ward 3 seat. David, how you doing? Thanks for being here.
I'm doing good, William. Thanks for having me. I was excited when I got the message to come in. So I do appreciate you taking your time out to ask me some questions, and I'm ready when you are.
Well, we are ready to go. We're going to jump right into question one.
Sure.
Everybody gets this question in one form or another. David, you're running for office. It's your first time running. Mm-hmm. What's the motivation? Why do you want to subject yourself to this?
Yeah. So that's a question that comes up a lot, and for me, it's fairly simple. The residents have to be the motivation. This is who we serve. This is who puts us into office. The residents are our bosses, and if I felt as though the residents didn't want me to run, I wouldn't be running. However, early on in the spring, I had been discussing, or I was approached about potentially running from several residents in my community based on some issues that I help them deal with in the community, and that was very motivating for me because I never really thought about getting into politics, but I do have an environmental science background. My degree from Wesleyan University is in environmental science. I do work in somewhat of a spin-off of that field now within data science for precision agriculture, smart energy. So when I was approached, the residents were telling me, David, you're very well versed in environmental concerns here in the ward, which we have several. And so I thought about it, and it was very humbling when they asked me to put my name, put my name in the ring. I decided to do it, and I don't regret it at all. I've had a blast so far, knocking on doors, meeting neighbors, meeting residents, listening to concerns. And so, now I'm here with the main motivation to just serve the residents properly, transparently, and provide them a sense of a voice and true representation without any agenda, just truly to serve them.
So you mentioned that you have helped some constituents out already.
Sure.
With problems. What kind of problems are those? Did it have to do with your environmental science background or just typical ward issues? Yeah,
so the major problem that we were having in our community was a project called, there was actually two development projects that were going on off of Highland Ave. The main one, which I assisted in helping many of the residents fight, was called Overlook Acres.
Right.
This Overlook Acres project was a very large, I believe 280 to 290 unit development that was going to be put directly next to a mostly single family home residential neighborhood off of Highland Ave. Couple of very big issues with this development. One, the residents didn't want it. It was pretty clear from day one they didn't want it. Two, there was documented historical contamination on this site. And so me and a few other residents discovered this. Two residents in particular, they spent about an hour at the library and they found the document. Now, that's concerning to me for several reasons. One, this should have come up in Environmental Site Assessment 1. The first thing you do is a historical site assessment on any pollution or contaminants on that plot, especially when you're going to be developing such a large building. Not only that, but it was directly next to wetlands and included a 90-foot intrusion into the 100-foot wetlands buffer zone. So you have two big issues, intrusion on the buffer zone and historical contamination. Now, the contamination issue was brought up in planning board meetings and Concom meetings back in, I believe, February or March. March was the first meeting, I believe it was brought up by a resident that there was contamination on this land. When that was brought up, me and the residents, began to dig more deeply into this. This is when the document was found. So we had known there was pollution there and contamination. So did several residents that lived in that neighborhood for many years. We continuously brought this up for 8 months. 8 months we brought this up. We provided documentation. We wrote letters. Every time we had a planning board meeting, Concom meeting, it was, for some reason, continuously ignored by the current administration, who, by the way, was pushing for this project to go through the whole time, misrepresenting the neighbors in what they wanted, and working with the developers to get this project pushed through. Now, we're sitting here fighting this thing tooth and nail, and the city's just pushing it right along. It's very concerning to me because this is something that needs to come up and should have came up in March when we discovered the contamination, when we brought it up. So now you have 8 months of meetings back and forth with developers, city wasting time and money when they could have just listened to the residents who had lived there their whole lives from day one, did a pollution assessment on the site, discovered it, and shut it down. Unfortunately, it was ignored. We got to November, the city, Concom, and planning board conditionally passed the project. The project was set to go through. We made some last-ditch efforts to require the pollution and contamination assessment from the environmental firm and developers. So it passed conditionally upon them having to show that, it was clean and safe. Lo and behold, like we all had known, it came back as, in my opinion, one of the most polluted plots of land in the state. I talked to a good friend of mine. I have many connections in the environmental field, and he does environmental site assessments for a living for a major international company, and he described the pollutants on this plot of land as the holy trinity of pollution and contaminants. Now, think for a second, if that development was allowed to go through because a few of us neighbors didn't fight it, you're digging up what could be potentially extremely hazardous material directly next to a wetland and in a residential neighborhood. That's a mistake that can't happen. It simply cannot happen. You cannot overlook something like that to that extent. So, thankfully, we did have residents and folks like myself able to figure that situation out. And now, I think the most concerning thing about that plot of land is we still don't know and haven't heard anything from the city about remediation. Now, from what I know, the current developer is suing the landowner now, pulled out of the project completely.
Right, that's correct. Yep.
Suing the landowner. And in that lawsuit that they filed, it states that the plot and the amount of contamination present poses severe and imminent threat to the residents and the public and the environment. When are we going to hear about this? This needs to be remediated, which in their terms or their estimates, it's going to cost as much as $35 million. But there's clearly a big pollution and contamination issue on this site in a residential neighborhood and next to wetlands that conditionally got passed through and was pushed through by the current administration. Again, a mistake that can happen and should not happen.
All right, so you really touched a lot on the environmental issues on that particular site, and I'm familiar with that, and I believe there's automobiles and everything else down there in that site.
That's correct.
A lot of scrap metal along with all the fluids that came with it.
Mm-hmm.
So we're going to jump right into question 2, which we kind of touched on there, because question 2 is development.
Sure.
Development's been an issue for a long time, and
Yep.
it's questions we've asked everybody. It's an issue citywide. Ward 3, of course, is no exception.
Right.
You got the hospital expansion plans and state plans for Route 107 progressing, slowly, but progressing. How do you see future development in Ward 3 moving forward?
Sure. So, I'm going to be all about quality of life for the existing residents here. I think we need to respect our existing residents, what they want, and how they see development moving forward. Now, as far as my vision for development, on the 107 corridor or, in Ward 3 in general, it's all about smart development for me. Let me give you an example. Smart development, I agree, would be expanding Salem Hospital. When Union Hospital shut down in Lynn, that caused an increased demand for Salem Hospital. What that does is Salem residents now may have to wait longer, may not get seen as quickly. So expanding the Salem Hospital is a good thing for residents. It makes sense. It's only going to help alleviate some of the burden we had to take on from Union Hospital closing. Another example would be Tropical Products. Tropical Products, business. It's going in a business-zoned area, and it's going to bring jobs to Salem. Now, the issue with Tropical Products previously was back in January 2020, the current administration in office now voted to rezone that to a residential zoning in order to put in 170 units of apartments.
The new site or their current site? The site they're moving to?
Yes.
Yes.
The site they're moving to was voted to be changed to R3 by the current administration. Fortunately for the residents of Ward 3, there were 4 councilors that voted against it. And at that time, they needed just a simple, and so that rezoning never happened. And if it did, you'd have 179 units there right now, and Tropical Products would have never been able to move there. So just because something isn't on a plot of land yet, it doesn't mean it's the wrong zoning. It just means that the right thing has not come along yet. Now, this is only a few months later, and now we have a great new smart development going in instead of luxury apartments that were pushed by the current administration to go in there. So, I mean, we owe that smart development to Councilors Domingo, Sargent, Flynn, and Dibble, because they saved that plot from getting rezoned. Now, as far as further development on Highland Ave, again, we need to take a step back and reevaluate our infrastructure, reevaluate the traffic and safety concerns on 107. If you just look at a simple eye test of 107, especially before COVID, and that's going to come back where we have just an influx of cars because people are back to traveling and people are commuting to jobs, et cetera. The traffic is not, it's not good. I think we can all agree on that. Now that we have ambulances coming up 107, very frequently, getting stuck in that traffic, trying to make it to a hospital, trying to help people and care for people, save people's lives in some cases, I don't believe that continuing to try and flood the Highland Ave corridor with apartments that'll bring insurmountable amount of cars and vehicles is a good idea. Take, for example, the Overlook and the 333 Highland Ave, which was the Jefferson project after the Cineplex was shot down. That would have brought, 280, 170, close to 500 units, round numbers, into that area. So you're talking at least 500 cars just turning into that one area off of Highland Ave. I mean, that's not smart development by any means necessary. It's just not, no matter which way you want to slice it. And not only that, but if we want to become a walking and biking city, try and walk or bike Highland Ave. You can't. I tried to do it. I felt like I was going to get hit by a car several times. So until we create an infrastructure that can support walking, biking city, or infrastructure that can support more traffic on Highland Ave, we need to be a lot smarter about the developments that we try to put in that area. And so that's, I would take a step back and reevaluate what we can do with Highland Ave to make it more safe, to make some calming traffic measures into place, and then talk about making more developments and bringing more people into that area.
All right, so you touched on both housing, very important issue, and a multifaceted issue.
Sure.
And you touched on traffic, which are both natural follow-up questions here. Let's start with the traffic. Highland Ave is a mess, as has been for years. What's the solution for traffic? How do you feel about the trial and errors of traffic control that the administration has implemented over the years? Some that they're going to keep, some that they're not. Do you think we're going in the right direction? If not, how do you address this?
Well, I don't think there's a one solution solves all problem to traffic on Highland Ave. Unfortunately, Highland Ave is one of the only roadways into Salem. There's not really room to expand more lanes. So, we need to look at and work with traffic professionals, which we've been doing, about, restructuring lights, turn lanes. But again, there's things that we're going to come up with that can help alleviate some traffic, right? But what we can't do is go backwards and create more traffic before we figure out the solutions to alleviate the traffic. So it's something that, personally I would work hand in hand with traffic specialists and engineers to figure out different types of solutions to implement to ease traffic. But again, that's something that is, it's something I'm learning about now, and I accept that I don't know a lot about traffic or traffic engineering, but I will be willing to work and learn about it if I'm elected and come up with solutions that make sense, solutions that people want, right? Because we can talk about things that traffic engineers want to implement, but if the residents don't want it, then why are we going to do it? So a lot's going to depend on really working with traffic engineers to give us multiple options of alleviating traffic, and then have discussions with the residents as to what they see will work out best and what will make their lives and quality of lives better.
I see. So let's walk into the housing mess just a little bit.
Sure.
Whenever you're talking about housing, you're talking about affordable housing. Do you think Salem has enough affordable housing? Do we need more affordable housing? And included in that question, is affordable housing as currently defined actually affordable, or do we need to adjust that?
All right, so let me start with the first part of the question. Salem has, I believe, between 14 and 14.8% low income residents. We have about 12.3 or 12.5% affordable housing. So there's a gap, obviously, that we need to make up for. Now, in my opinion, and economically speaking, if you just run the numbers, you require a building, right, with 100 units, 90% can be market rate. 10% is what we would require currently as affordable to be built. So you have 10 units of affordable and 90 units of market rate. Now, if 90 units of market rate are sitting at $2,300 a month, and 10 units of affordable housing are sitting at, say $1,200 a month, how does that average across the board or increase the rents across it? Basic math tells you that 90% at market rate is going to increase the average market rate of rents in Salem compared to 10%. So that 10% number, if developers want to come in here and build large buildings, that's going to double at least 20%. So if they're not going to take on the burden of developing a reasonable and adequate amount of affordable housing, we shouldn't entertain it. Not only that, but if they want zoning changes involved in order to put these buildings in, then they should have to reciprocate Salem in some way in order for us to make a zoning change work. And I think a good reciprocation for that would be, again, increase the affordable housing of those buildings. Salem also needs senior housing. And I haven't seen much senior housing proposed anywhere. So that's something I think we could use as well. And as far as the second portion of your question, I may be missing a middle part here, but I believe that the second portion of your question is our definition of affordable housing.
Is it really affordable?
Truly affordable.
Yeah.
Right. So, simple answer to that question, no, it's not. And here's the reason why. The definition of affordable housing currently is based off of the AMI, annual median income of the greater Boston area. Now, what I believe that involves is cities and towns such as Somerville, Cambridge, Everett, Malden, Medford, where you have a combination of infrastructure there and higher salary paying jobs and MBTA systems and railways that allow people to live there, commute very small distances, and afford higher rents because there's better jobs. Think about the biotech and startup culture in Cambridge and Somerville. Think about how easy it is to hop on a train or bus in Cambridge or Somerville or Malden or Everett or Medford and get to your job. Very, very easy to do. They have the industry there to do it. That's why the residents there make a fair amount more money. So if we're taking the annual mean income of residents there, implementing it into our equation here in Salem, it doesn't work. Might be affordable to them, not going to be affordable to us. So I think that if Salem had more jobs here, that more people in Salem could obtain. If we had a subway system, which we don't, and likely we would never be able to because it would just simply flood, then that would allow us to somewhat solve the affordable housing crisis because more people would be making more money in Salem. I think that should cover your question.
I think you did very well with that, David. So we're gonna move on to question 3.
Sure.
But of course, question 3 is very possibly gonna intrude into that development conversation also. Feel free to take it any direction you want. You have significant wetlands within Ward 3. A lot of people, you kind of lose sight of that because you can't see a lot of it. Is the city approaching the conservation of these wetlands and also protecting the properties in the flood zones properly? You've already touched on this a little bit, but are we doing it right with the conservation lands? Are we protecting our flood zone properties?
So my answer is going to be somewhat long for this because you have to go back to November, in my opinion, of 2019, actually, or 20 November last year.
We've all lost track of time.
Right.
2 years.
So when the Overlook Acres disaster was finally over, everyone in the city recognized the need for new wetlands protection and flood zone protection. Everyone from the planning board to Concom, all the city councilors, just about the whole city. The fact that we recognized that our existing ordinance was outdated and insufficient tells you a lot about everything that happened before we recognized this. The fact that we only recognize this as a reactionary function of residents having to fight that development tooth and nail is concerning because this should have been recognized several years ago. The way things are going with climate change, having such an outdated ordinance, that's going to affect Salem for 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years. So, I have a problem with the way that Salem was allowing so many exceptions and just waivers for people to build in buffer zones.
So you're talking the appeals process.
Yes, because here's the thing: many of those people were already in place, and in November they all agreed that the ordinance is outdated and we need new protections put in. But if they all agreed that, then they all knew that previously throughout the year or years that this has been an issue. The other problem is after the whole debacle of Overlook Acres, where that could have absolutely destroyed a majority of the wetlands in Ward 3, quite literally. There's no exaggeration in that statement. The current ward councilor decided to take responsibility for putting in a new ordinance. She took ownership of that. So come January 2020, we found out that there was a private working group of city officials and I think one resident maybe to work on a new ordinance. Now it's completely private. We don't know what's going on yet with it, but they decided to hire a consultant, environmental consultant. So what happens, in a city process is you put out an RFP, request for proposal, to environmental firms, civil engineering firms, what have you, that would help this private working group develop a new ordinance to protect the wetlands appropriately. That happened in January. The city decided to, by invite only, put the RFP out. They only invited four firms, okay? Only 2 responded to this RFP. Now, in my opinion, this new wetlands ordinance is going to be key, absolutely critical for Salem to establish itself as a climate resilient and forward-thinking city. Not only that, but it's a public safety crisis that we need to protect these areas. I mean, think about Salem's been filled in several areas over the last 200 years. I mean, that's no secret. That's known. That's why we have flooding issues on Jefferson and a Brook Street berm that overflowed just recently. So it's very local and it's real, and it's affecting residents. And so you have this RFP that's put out, and you only get two applications back, right? So if I'm sitting here at a private company and I need to hire someone for a very, very important issue at my company to be put forward, I'm not going to take 2 applications and interview 2 people, because I think this is much more important than just looking at two applications, right? This should have been put out to public bid so that every environmental firm, civil engineering firm could have had a shot at it. We should have waited to get more applications. Well, I mean, frankly, we couldn't, because we only invited 4 firms. And they chose 1, and I think it's inadequate, it's insufficient to only have such a selective group of firms respond to this RFP, and you simply just go with one of the 2. I don't agree. The other issue I have with that is that the RFP stated that this environmental firm should help the private working group populate a policy matrix, okay? So this policy matrix, according to the RFP, was already there in January. No one's seen anything since. I don't know what the policy matrix consists of. None of the residents do. It hasn't been released. I've requested it. It hasn't come up at any of the wetlands ordinance meetings. So we don't know how this ordinance is shaping up. We have no idea. We've had several meetings about it. There's been 0 substance about what policy will actually be in this new ordinance. That's a problem, because we have 1 shot at this, William. I mean, think about it. We're not going to pay another $40,000 to do another ordinance change in 3 years, 4 years, 5 years. We have 1 shot at this to make it right for Salem and for us, for it to be effective for the next 50 years, right? So we need to do it right now. The RFP was very, this is something that I found very peculiar and odd. In the RFP, it stated that they needed a firm that would respond tactfully. Okay, tactfully is the term they used, to suggestions to use this wetlands policy to affect development. Now, that doesn't sit well with me, because the number 1 most harmful impact to wetlands is human development. Number 2 is pollution. So
Which comes from
development? So why are we trying to separate, or have the firm we hire respond tactfully to questions about development and the wetlands, when these things are intertwined so intimately that it's almost impossible to separate the 2, right? So we need to understand that human development is the most harmful thing to wetlands in modern times. So the RFP I thought was flawed right away.
You're thinking that perhaps they're not approaching this ordinance with a completely open mind?
I'm thinking they're not approaching it with a level of comprehension that they should.
Fair enough.
And so here's my concern, and this is why, that's why I thought the city isn't approaching it correctly. But here's my concern, and I really hope that they prove me wrong. I hope this ordinance comes out before the election so we can see if the current administration actually wants to practice what they preach. Okay?
I honestly don't see that happening.
I don't either.
Yes.
But it was supposed to. It was supposed to come out in the fall. Nothing even has been released of any substance, as I mentioned. But I really do hope they prove me wrong, because in my opinion, when it comes out, it'll obviously be the newest wetlands ordinance, wetlands protection
Well,
ordinance.
it'll be subject to the open meeting laws at that point and have to go through the approval process. It won't just come out as an ordinance.
Well, I'm saying,
Yeah.
when the ordinance is put in place, it's going to be the newest
Yeah,
ordinance in
right.
Massachusetts, right? We see what's happening with climate change, with flooding. If this isn't the most comprehensive wetlands protection ordinance in the state, in my opinion, it's a failure. Because why are we going to create a new ordinance that's going to be outdated again in 5 to 10 years? It's not the point of protecting Salem, protecting residents, and advancing Salem into a state of climate resiliency that will continue to protect us well into the future. And I actually have a website that outlines, my vision for wetlands protection. It has an interactive map, some educational information. People can go right on my Facebook page, click on the wetlands map link, and be directed to this website. And it'll outline a lot of my ideas on what I believe would be comprehensive wetlands protection.
All right, good. That's pretty long. That's a good answer. We only got a few minutes left.
Sure.
So we've touched on development, we've touched on traffic, we've certainly touched on your environmental concerns.
Mm-hmm.
So other than the environmental concerns, which are concerns everywhere, I
Sure.
mean, that should be everybody's priority. What are your priorities for Ward 3 if you were to win on November 2nd?
So some of what being a counselor entails is, it's not rocket science, it's very simple. It's simply being accessible and responsive to residents and showing them that you care, picking up the phone when they call, and trying to address the issues as best as you can that they have. So as far as priorities go, I mean, I'm not going to dictate those priorities, the residents will. And I'm all ears. And the first call I get, I can't wait to drive out to that resident's house, meet them, figure out what their issue is, and work with them to fix it. Some of these issues are as simple as a crack in a sidewalk in front of their house, and some are a lot more complicated than that. But each issue deserves its time and its respect, because the residents are the one that choose you for office, and they put their trust in you to be able to help them with issues small and large. And so as far as priorities go, I mean, that'll be dictated completely by the residents, and I'm looking forward to hearing from them.
All right, very good. Well, guys, Dave, that's it. There's your 35 minutes, almost. I mean, we might be 2 minutes short.
Okay.
That happens sometimes.
Yeah.
Very nice. So that's going to do it. I appreciate
All right.
you coming in.
I appreciate you, Bill. Thank you.
All right, guys. This is William Legault from Salem Digest. We just had a nice chat with David Freni, running for Ward 3 Councilor. General election is the 2nd of November, and we're really seriously imploring you guys, get out and vote. Every vote counts. Your voice should be heard, and that's the most direct and impactful way to make it be heard. So this is Bill at Salem Access TV. We're going to come to you with another candidate before you know it. Thanks very much.